Right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a bit of a different live stream. Not something that I've done before, but basically this is a research stream. It is for the big project that's really, I think, going to take up most of certainly the first quarter of the year. And this is what I've called Atrocity. For those of you in the chat who are talking about tea, no, I've got water for this one. I'm out of tea bags. I need to go get some more. But basically, we'll be going through all of these resources here. I put out a call on Twitter to gather resources into the Grooming Gang scandal. Most of these came from one chap who has been collating mainstream media and Twitter sources for what seems like an awful long time. But I thought, given the timing of basically Majid Nawaz calling for an inquiry, and Sargon's obviously going off on and sorry, I'm just getting some messages from Sarah, who may be joining us to help out. But yes, the idea is to create a comprehensive thing. So this big plan, and the reason I'm doing this in the form of research streams as well is because obviously what I want is to keep myself accountable to you. This is it's a long project. I fully expect that these resources that I have here are nowhere near enough. We're going to go down a rabbit hole, and hopefully sources will lead to sources will lead to sources. So there's that. I can see Autochat in the chat, I can see Polypant, I can see Immaterial and Davey, nice to see you, and Bakuta Pterodax as well, Colin P. Smith. Really good. So, the general gist, I also want feedback from you guys, right? Because this is one of those projects which, for a one-person project, effectively, is not going to work. So I need continual feedback as we go along. The general gist of it that I want to get done. How long do I reckon this stream will last? Today, at least 3 hours. I'm hoping to do at least 3 hours today. But we'll be running again tomorrow as well. I'm hoping to push out a video on attachment theory as well in the morning. But I want to spend this weekend doing a lot of the stuff on this. The way I want to structure this... Sorry, I'm just going to message Sarah and see if she'll come on, because... she has an awful lot of knowledge on this already, that she's picked up in general, and one of her interests. So I'm just going to see if I can get her on board. This stream may be a little bit quieter. Please feel free to drop in, drop out as you would like. Let me see. There we go. And okay, so she's gone out. She may join us later. I'm just going to tell her that we know when you want to come on. Lovely. Right. So, at least 3 hours. Hence why the bottle of water, and I may drop in and out to myself to refill. A good idea might be to eventually split the stream into small incident or time-based videos to make it more easily referable as a resource for others to use. Yeah, so I want to collate everything into 2 primary documents. I'm obviously going to be scripting off-air as I go along, but I will be trying to, as thankfully one of the gents who helped me collate this stuff has done, collate them into subcategories. The streams themselves are going to run it in terms of the timeline of the video. I may rename them later and put them together, but the eventual product that should be produced at the end will be a resource-rich document to go alongside sort of a mini documentary. I'm expecting it to be between 45 minutes and an hour, going through everything. So that's that. Because I think we need something tangible at the end as well, which will be a comprehensive summary, if such a thing can be said to exist. So I have nothing in here at the moment. This will be for stats. and moving things around if we need to do any calculations. We've obviously got the Atrocity resources here, which is subcategorized slightly at the moment, and then some stuff which has come in since we put this together has also been put at the top. And this document I expect to swell. At the end, I expect, because resources will be discarded potentially if they're found to be wanting, we'll have a comprehensive document that will be shareable and it will have everything in it. So that's the idea. Now, the way I was thinking of running the documentary section, as it were, if I pop this here, is we'd open up with a section on Rotherham, kind of trying to underpin the beginnings of the problem. We will move then into the wider statistics about how widespread this is, because Rotherham is the worst case, right? As far as we're aware, it's something like 1,500 girls who have been officially recognised to have been abused there over the past 30, 40 years. That's more like 30 years, 32-ish. And then you've also got sorry, it's not 32 years, because Rotherham's a weird one, because they only really started the inquiry in 1997. So we'll be starting from that baseline, but we'll also be looking back at the wider statistics. I want to find out when the first case was, because we know that there was stuff going on in the 80s, but again, it's all got to be sourced, it's all got to be referenced. A lot of this stuff is picked up, and then you put it to the side because you go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and that's horrible, and then you move on, and you don't retain the sources, and you don't have something specific which can be used for it. So what I want to do is find something which is evidenceable, that has the wider statistics, because the largest estimate that I can think of is 72 towns and cities and up to 1 million girls. And I want to, if we're going to push that statistic, then I need it backed up. We know that there is about 385-ish prosecuted cases at the moment. We know the demographic breakdowns on that as well. But some people have estimated that that's only 1% of perpetrators at the moment. So, again, that statistic will need to be backed up. Once we get past the wider statistics, which is a little bit later on down the line, we will go into who is responsible for covering up. So we'll do the cover up. But I'm not sure whether or not we're going to go into that first, or whether or not we're going to go into the police and social services aspect of it, right? So there's the cover-up, which is the big people, mainly Labour councillors, that sort of thing, and higher-ups in the police, but there's also the general overarching ethos of the police and social services, and why that went awry, and that will be basically a tie-in between the Macpherson report, which is the report in the UK, if you're unaware, which declared the police to be institutionally racist based on implicit bias data, implicit bias testing, even though it was very poorly done, and I believe the researchers who were responsible for that data said it was hideously misused, and that's been swept under the carpet. But that was the report which terrified the police into not being seen to be racist. And on top of that, there's the concept of Islamophobia, which really arose kind of towards the latter end of the whole saga, which is that if you start, when you get things like Naz Shah retweeting that or liking a tweet which said that for the good of diversity, the victims should be quiet, and that's general. But that's a little bit down the line, and we'll see how the project develops as we go along. Right. What do you think about creating a publicly accessible Google Doc so we can access the links you use in our own time? Right, well, what I'm going to do is, as we go through each of these links, I'm going to put them in a separate document, and we can link that up, that we can make that public, because I don't want to put links up in a publicly accessible document that haven't been verified, that we haven't verified, and that's that. All right. I would have, instead of grooming gangs, I'd have put hashtag mass ethnic rape in the title, but I don't think that would reach so much of an audience in terms of the people who need to see this, because I want to really get away from the title of grooming gangs, but we'll have a lot of stuff in the final product. Decades, go talk to the Hindu. They've been at this for a millennium. You'll have to expand on that for me. And if you have any resources, again, I have Twitter open. My Twitter DMs are also open. You can tweet things at me or that way. If you're in my Discord, you can also reach me there. And yeah, again, my DMs are open there. You can send me a message, etc. Right. Let's see where we're stuck. So let's. I'm going to. These are all the newest ones. Some of them are books and resources that I still need to read, like Easy Meat here, which is. I'm trying to remember the name of the chap who put them up, but it's like Peter something. It is Peter McLaughlin, and I know he's got a website with some statistics on it as well, and we'll try and dive into that later. But what we're really after at this point is where this all began. So I'm after Rotherham stuff, the J Report, and Huddersfield, because they're quite closely connected. But I'm just thinking where, because there's a lot of resources, I want to know where it's at. So, let's see what we've got here. There's some more stuff at the bottom here, which is that. Mother and dad's arrested. In fact, I will pull up something as irritating and unuseful as it might be. I will also pull up the Wikipedia Grooming Gang's scandal page, because here we are. Rochdale child sex abuse ring. It's one of them, and because there could be some interesting rabbit holes down here as well. Of course, the big thing that we want to highlight with this is, of course, it's organised. This is the thing that makes it different to all the other statistics. We may actually end up going into rape and grooming statistics nationally anyway. And then later on as well, I want to, like at the end, I want to tie things into an international context, because this is happening all over Europe as far as I'm aware. Right. So I've heard that, I don't really care about whether or not Rotherham has had a female MP. So early 90s, which is the taxi driver stuff. Let me see. And that's the J Report. So let's get into the J Report first. I think I have that here. Okay, let's find it. J Report. There's no E on the end. This was published in 2015. Evidence. Reports. Okay. Let's get both of these up then. Kick the J Report. Why? Let me see. Government wouldn't lie, would they? Not just English girls, either boys and Asian children were also targeted. Well, hopefully uncover things like that as we go along. I thought I was bringing up the pedo's Facebook page. What? Second suggestion to use archive links with how many people there are wanting that. Yeah, we'll see what we can find. Oh, Kick J is a meme. Oh, because JXSE, I can't remember how to pronounce his name. Alright. Let's go down Again, I mentioned this will be a fairly quiet stream. I'm not going to have lots to say. I've not prepared anything in advance apart from the resources. So I will be reading along with us, along with you guys. Trying my best to make it large enough for you to read. Which is not helped if I make it so large that my face covers some of it. Right. Okay. On the 7th of July 2014, independent panel inquiry into child sexual abuse. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Next. Is this just the commission for it, or is this the actual report? Let me see what I can find. Contents. Concern. People trying to cover their ass. Where's the apology for Tommy Robinson? Well, we'll see how Tommy comes into it, and I'm sure he will. But the focus of this is not Tommy Robinson. Why can I not? Here we are. Right, so you're saying there's a Times report in 2012. Okay, see if we can find that. Let's see. We can do a custom range. What's this? So in January 2011, the Times published an article about prosecutions. This is the Rochdale case. We may focus in on whichever case has more information about it. This is the case from 2004 to 2011. How many victims? Doesn't say. How do I propose to distinguish Pakistani rape gangs as a unique type of crime? It's all about the organisation. I cannot remember the name of the chap. There's someone out there with a quote which talks about how he was a police officer and he said that he's never seen anything like it, and the fact that they're working together in kind of these organised cells, which are almost like terrorist cells. It's very different to like basically crimes of opportunity. Yeah, I think if the largest statistics are to be believed, it's 1 in 30 English girls were raped, but we'll have to see. Alright, so we're already working our way back. There's an accelerated report addressing the extent to which children in residential care are affected by localised grooming. Final report was due in 2013. Accelerated report. Is that what we have here? What number is it? 23. Okay, this is the issue when you cannot get access to these things. Let me try and find a way. Here we are. If I somehow pause when I'm researching, I'll it's just that I'm going back to the chat to see if anyone's put anything which is relevant. Okay. Yes. Alright, we want emerging findings. Alright. So this is specifically about, this came out in 2012. Let's start with things. Right, so we have our first case. We have new document, please. I'm just going to call this Atrocity Findings, and this one I'll make public at the end. So we have this document. We'll start with this. So this is specific to is the Office of the Children's Commissioner. And it is a really awkward briefing for Michael Gove. Okay, let's see what we can find in here, shall we? And how did they do it? Right. It was a 2-year inquiry from 2011. So I'll move. It's hard. I want everyone to be able to see what I'm writing. See, 2 years. So 2-year inquiry from 2011, looking at child sexual exploitation, CSE, from which period? Because there is one here, isn't there? I click emerging findings. Yeah, 14 months. So that would be, if it started in 2011, but when in 2011? Forward. Don't care. Yes, yes, yes. I just want to find out when this exactly came about. Introduction. Right, it's not going to give us an answer, so we shall just assume it's from 2009 to 2011 then. 14 months. Let's see. Okay, so what did they do? They asked for evidence. They went to 14 sites. Because this is specific to which sites? That's what I want to know. This is the trouble with accelerated reports. And the fact that governments are really bad at referencing. They interviewed people, and Bedfordshire University did some research. We'll see if that produces any preliminary results. We may look into that. They used SPSS, it's fine. NVivo is a little less useful, but can also be used. Those are both statistical analysis tools. And they did a thematic analysis. Limitations. Couldn't find characteristics on everyone. They didn't look at children already in care. They think it's a national, not a national issue. So they don't want to extrapolate things out from the 14 sites and make and assume that that's what is going on everywhere. Problems with local, yeah. Now here's an interesting one. Okay. Children have to be missing for more than 24 hours. They're not reported missing if they are taken away or thrown out. Right. Not allowed to report on the number of abortions which were taking place. Okay. Let's have a look at some of the findings then. The following section outlines the evidence base we are currently analysing in relation to known cases of child sexual exploitation in gangs and groups. Total submissions received 115. Number of areas which submitted evidence was 71. 11 responses from voluntary organisations and 1 from a health organisation. They had 68 interviews with 60 agencies and 3 accommodation providers. Okay. And they had 252 total agencies who contribute. So, most of that appears to be safeguarding and charity, funnily enough. Okay. Oh my god. Right, so, victims, here we go. So, there were, how many victims? Okay, well, we'll just get the ranges of that. Age of victims was typically between 10 to 19, but there were additionally 18 submissions between ages of 4 and 9. This is irritating. They're not using ONS categories, so they Office of National Statistics. They are literally just a collection of categories defined by the victims. For example, a victim may have been of Bangladeshi origin, but of both British or Bangladeshi nationality, or Polish origin and either Polish or British nationality. So they can't work out how many of them are British nationals, because they've only done it by ethnicity, which is irritating. But I imagine it's because they've got so many agencies. It's irritating that they don't give statistics. Number of they appear to have preyed on the disabled as well. A lot of people with learning and autistic disabilities, but they can't quantify them, which is irritating. We'll try and find the follow-up report, because this is obviously the accelerated report, and try our best to find out more. Perpetrators were both male and female. This is not something you hear very often. Were both male and female, but predominantly male. And ranged in age from 12 to 65. It's interesting that, because you can see from part of this, the kind of indoctrination of the children, especially the young men, I presume, who are the 12-year-olds, who are being taken to these places and broken in, as it were, radicalized. Okay. And again, a huge mix of ethnicities, so to the point where it may as well be worthless because we don't have the breakdown by percentage. Again, they can't quantify them. And again, this is all gangs. This is not specific to the Muslim rape gangs. So this will go more into general statistics. The abuse is often extremely violent. And they basically attribute it to pornography. Which I don't see it as being a thing. Let's see what we've got. Ofsted submitted evidence that as of the 31st of March 2012, there were 2,074 children's homes. And so we have a total of about 12,000 children's home places, 72% independent, which is probably why it came out there as opposed to in the government-run ones. That's 12,000 places, and looks like even if we take the middle end, that's something like 60,000 children at any one time. Most of the victims go through multiple care homes. This basically says that they're most at risk. They're the most at-risk group. Children in care account for a disproportionate number of the sexually exploited. The residential care ones are the most at risk, and they have the most difficult children. I like this. Not all have negative experiences. Okay. What do we have? 42.6% of the referenced children were in care. 81% of the evidence sessions referenced children in care. And at site visits 100%, which is natural because the sites they would have visited would be care sites. Okay, here we get some more hard stats. So they had 250 contributions, right? But only 9 responses included empirical information on children in care. I'm irritated they don't have an aggregate figure as well, but we may get to that. But basically 1,831 victims, and on average 20% were in care, although this seems to be really poorly stratified, because you have some of them here which are 8%, so Organisation G here, Organisation A 6%, and then you also have places like D and F 86%, 70%. Was all of this going on within the time period that they're talking about, which is the 2009 to 2011 period? Yes, apart from 2 of them. Sorry I'm not reading out more information. A lot of this stuff is quite just quite dull and busy words. But it seems like they're trying to find out why some children in care are more at risk. Mm-hmm. Evidence indicates it's the relationship within the homes and the pull factors, exploitation outside the home, which determined whether or how regularly the child runs away. Emerging findings indicate relationships with parents, care staff, outreach, social workers, and other trusted adults are the most critical factors. Unsurprising there. Because a number of children, like they had, 1,500? 1,800, and 31 victims. In fact, we'll put that there. 1,831 victims noted from 9 organisations. And of those, we have what appears to be, just at locations A and B, 527 runaways. Is that what it is? No, care status. Missing rates. Yeah, 527. Were they missing? The trouble, the amount of data that is not recorded is difficult. Most of the ones who go missing appear to be the ones living at home, but above board there's a domination, as you can see here, of people who are missing rather than staying. Let's break down my care arrangements. Thanks for the $10 Insta. Didn't need to do that, but thank you. We can make use of that, definitely. But this is going to take a while. So, to those of you saying, what's the exact victim breakdown? Unfortunately, this is why no one's really done anything on that. Because you get all these different reports like these, which are limited in scope, and it's very difficult. Which is why we are going to try and produce, or I'm going to try and produce, with your help, something which can reflect that. So, we're just after... Right, we may come back to this one, but we want to just go through this discussion here. Recent case in Rochdale highlighted the use of takeaway shops by 9 men. So again, we have 9 men in Rochdale, and let's see. The use of takeaway shops to groom and abuse girls in groups is a model of abuse we've seen in other parts of the country. As part of the call for evidence and site visit processes, this is not the only model we've identified. The interim report sets out in detail the range of ways in which children are being sexually exploited. So we'll try and find that interim report, because this is a briefing. Both perpetrators and victims are ethnically diverse. They come from all social backgrounds. They operate within highly restricted areas. So they don't have anything here. Others, by contrast, are moving children's distances. So it's either highly localized or highly national. Victims tended to have a history of being sexually abused as children. beforehand. This prior abuse is both perpetrated and known about. It's rarely formally recognised or addressed. Very few children have child protection plans under the criterion of coming from a background of child sexual abuse. Buses, trains, and taxis are used. Some groups are linked to the extended or immediate family of the victims, and some overlap with that's internal familial abuse. Differences between group and gang associated. Okay. There's big differences between group associated and gang associated CSE. That's one of the things that we're after, we expected to find. Threats and intimidation are used. Yeah. So this seems to be a broad report. It can be confidently stated that group and gang associated child exploitation is taking... Right, okay, we'll take these themes out of it, right? And we'll see what we want from them. And then we'll go and find the interim report and see if they expand on it. Right. Group and gang associated is being perpetrated across varying ages, ethnicities and social backgrounds. Some areas, agencies are more interested in group associated, others are more interested in gang associated. Some services are better identifying gangs as opposed to others. Children are being sexually exploited by groups and gangs made up of people who are of both the same and different backgrounds. Okay. It's not just children in care. Children not in care are being sexually exploited, but the majority of children being exploited are not in care. A disproportionate number are in care. So the idea is that because there's more children outside of care than inside care, the overall numbers of children being exploited, then the ones not in care are being exploited to a larger number, but if you are in care, you're much, much more likely to be abused. Okay. So we have that. Right. Yeah, I'm trying to... this is the idea, but it's going to take at least a month. This is the idea. Evidence of the potential scale in gangs and groups. Again, this is an irritating thing because we're after the gangs. We're not necessarily that interested in the groups. We will obviously be interested in what the breakdown is of whether or not it's groups or gangs, how many gangs, how many groups, what the differences are which define them. But it's not as simple as all that. Let's see. There's a lot of grey area because of all these factors. They're saying things like, not all children who are missing from the home are reported. This leads to them not being identified as being at risk. Children aged 16 and over are not identified as those who are younger because they don't care less. They're over the age of sexual consent. They're not likely to be identified. Children's sexual exploitation happens during the day, but if you're out and about in the day, it's not viewed seriously. Criminal children or violent neighbourhood children are often not identified as missing or as risk of CSE as other children. Interesting. Health impacts are unclear. Any risks associated with B&Bs and hotels and hostels is not identified. Right, so a data request based on the indicators of child CSE, I'm just going to call it CSE, has been issued. We want to ascertain the number of children who are vulnerable to CSE, patterns and themes in the indicator set. Okay. The deadline for submissions is mid-June, and interim report is September 2012. Okay. So let's put the interim report to the bottom here. We'll go find that in a minute. We've still got 17 pages to go. What's the difference between groups and gangs? As I say, it's unclear here. I'm hoping that the interim report will clear it up. Conflicting opinions on the use of restraint and restriction of liberty. Okay. So they're worried about the care system. Again, focusing quite a lot on why residential children's homes are being targeted. There's also evidence that CSE kids are introducing other children within that residential home to their exploiters. In some cases, it's coerced. So here we have a case study. Juliet, which is not her real name, was an 11-year-old girl who was serially exploited by a group of teenagers. She appeared to have a history of intrafamilial child sexual abuse, so a family member was raping her probably. This has not been identified, and she was not. This had not been identified. She was not on any order at the point at which police disrupted the abuse and arrested the young man. She was placed in emergency care in a residential children's home. 2 other older girls with histories of CSE already living there. They absconded with her, took her to an abandoned house where they were all given drink, drugs, and were further sexually exploited, i.e. raped, and they returned voluntarily the next day. Again, 11 years old. 11. So, yeah. And this is, again, why the social services were saying, oh, this is child prostitution, or you get that statement from the bloody counsellor which said, we do not see any problems, this is not something, they've made an informed choice. It's an 11-year-old girl, come on, they cannot make decisions like this on their own. But we will take this this case. It may come in useful for something later on. It's not a gang if you don't do violent crimes. Is rape not a violent crime? No one ever talks about Fabianism. Looking into that was a valuable piece of the puzzle. The boss of ECB claimed he was a Marxist. So. Right. Children in residential units were criminalised as a result of their behaviour towards staff and property. Staff working in care homes need to recognise the distress and anger children may feel as a result of their abuse. Yeah, so this is the thing. I actually have personal experience of this, not as a victim of CSE, but some family members of mine. I don't know how much I want to go into with that. Basically, one of them had some serious issues regarding a natural disaster, which had caused a great deal of upheaval, issues with the father leaving, issues with the abandonment by the mother, abuse from an aunt, and when she came across to live with us, no matter how much love and affection that you give a child like that, sometimes they are just very, very unstable, and it's very difficult. I think she She broke my aunt's fingers on multiple occasions, and it was very difficult not to be resentful of that, especially from her brother as well. So, just at some point, it seems like staff just need to recognise that it's a product of something which is not necessarily just hatred towards you. It's a lot of unresolved issues. Boys are also being exploited. Okay, it's an important thing to take note of. And so what they want to do is improve the training of staff to recognise CSE. Okay. Children aged 16 or over who get moved to foyer, bed and breakfast, and hostel accommodation are at a significant risk. All the way up to the age of 25. And people don't care as much. Here we have another case. Rachel was a 17-year-old who was exploited in a group context over a 2-year period. She was under a full care order as a result of her sexual exploitation, and her mother felt unable to protect her. She was placed in a residential unit supported by a specialist CSE unit. She was approaching her 18th birthday, and she was going to leave the children's home. She was anxious, as the plan was to place her in a B&B, and she was told once categorised as a care leaver, she would stop receiving support, and she did not feel ready to be on her own. Because they're basically let go. It's one of those things where you come out of it, you leave, and that's it, the support stops. So they keep using children's homes to protect children from CSE. However, it doesn't appear to be working. And the staff are not prepared compared to, say, like an abuse shelter, like a specific domestic abuse shelter. And they can't make a recommendation on that. Okay. So what they recommended was another inquiry into residential care, that the guidelines and regulations should be updated so that staff get more training. Regulations should also prescribe any child in care from being placed in a B&B, because that's where they seem to be most at risk once they leave the care system. And there we go. And then a lot more checks and balances. So this is all about ensuring that people are informed, everybody knows where everyone is. All references in guidance and regulation to prostitution, which is the term that they were using when speaking of children, is now amended to CSE, because changing the phrase helps. Let's see. They want the police to interview the children. Again, that's going to be interesting when we get into the how complicit are the police, because that should be interesting. And then they want the interim report in 2012. And in 2013, a final report. Autumn 2013, final report. Okay. CSEG inquiry report. Let's see if we can find that, shall we? Nope, I want CSEG. This is just 12 pages. What's going on here? So this is an interesting thing. Threatening. This is the different ways in which children are threatened. So, ways in which grooming was enforced. We have threatening them with sharing the images of children they've taken online, harassment and bullying. They purchased a mobile phone for the victim, then shared their number amongst their members, and they would randomly contact them through social networking sites. What else do we have? We have using friends lists on social networking sites of known victims to target new children. They would quite often use or view extreme pornography. Share images of girls or boys with rival gang members to invite a sexual assault. They would often film the rapes. And they would publish the pin numbers of BlackBerry pin numbers of lists of girls that they labelled as easy. Okay. Let's see if I can find this final. Custom range 2013. Right. Let's go. If only someone had listened. What's this? No, this is the final report. But is this still the... No, this is a 123-page report. Okay, marvellous. I mean, not marvellous, but at least we found it. Involves multiple perpetrators, drugs and alcohol common. We think it is worth reiterating here that victims can be from any background. The vast majority are boys, but girls, but boys are also affected. But I want to see a breakdown of that. I want to see what that breakdown is and how it works. Because telling me that they can come from any ethnic background does not tell me the breakdown. Victims Okay, so victims reported to the inquiry came from a very diverse range of backgrounds. 28% were black and ethnic minorities, so that means that 72% were white. Okay. And black and ethnic minority is obviously a huge range of different identities as well. Noting, of course, again, that this is just child sexual exploitation in general. So this is the wider statistic rather than the grooming gang specifically. We're trying to work out to what degree the grooming gangs are a part of this and to what extent. Focuses on priorities, listening to children's and believe. Okay, so let's say the definition of gangs and groups. This is really important. So, gangs are predominantly street-based, durable social groups of children, young free people, and young adults who are seen as affiliates of a named group or identify or lay claim to territory, have an identifying structural feature, and are in conflict with similar groups. Groups are two or more people of any age connected through a formal or informal association, including but not exclusive to friendship groups. So it's interesting that it's anywhere from 2 people plus for groups in general, but they're not necessarily affiliated aside from friendship. That's a really important finding. Let me just see what we can get here. So I'm just going to make sure that that's correct. Right. That works. So this is the only someone had listened 2013 final CSEGG report. Let's get a link up for that. Gangs, there's groups. It's easier to say not a single Muslim girl is good. We'll see and we'll find out, won't we? We do have a breakdown on how many of the perpetrators for specifically grooming gang violence are Muslim, and that comes from the chap who wrote the book Easy Meat. So Peter McLaughlin, I think his name is. Where is it? There were 13 different patterns of CSE in gangs and groups. Alright. And again, it's important to recognise that this particular report is not talking about historic child abuse. It is only talking... It's historic now, but it is only examining a 2-year period. It's only exploring a 2-year period. And this is only reported stuff. And it seems to be disproportionately focused on residential children's homes. And it doesn't seem to, it's only reported cases, right? It's only the stuff that they can find. What's going on? They talked about me like I wasn't there, they were very harsh. There were 9 significant failures. Many agencies forget that children who are at high risk of CSE or already victims are ignored. 98% of LSCBs, which I will be It's an LSCB. What's the exact thing? London Safeguarding Children's Boards. A multi-agency body set up in every local authority. Okay. It's good to know. LSCB. Local. London Safeguarding Children's Board. Okay. Because these are useful to have as definitions. They are multi-agency bodies set up in each local authority. So, issues are LSCBs forget. Well, it's forget. They, what's a better word than forget? Forgetting the child. Not seen, not heard. 98% of them told the inquiry that a child sexual exploitation is a strategic priority. Half, almost, were unable to tell us how many victims have been identified in a single year in their local area. So, failed as recently as 2014 to identify the ways in which they measured CSE prevalence. In their areas of remit. 2012 even. Children will continue to be referenced as putting themselves at risk rather than perpetrators being. So, yeah. Children were seen as putting themselves at risk, not perpetrators victimizing rather than perpetrators being responsible. And didn't engage with the children. The inquiry uncovered a significant difference between children and young people's views of their needs and what would help them, and professionals' understanding of what would help children and young people then slip through the net. Okay. They failed to identify the ways in which they measured CSE prevalence. They failed to address the self-disclosed needs of those most at risk. What else? There is a lack of leadership amongst the senior decision makers. Well, it is politics. Who are failing to grasp the gravity of CSE, commit resources and coordinate multiple agency responses. It's unclear whether CSE is being seen as a child protection issue or a crime and disorder issue. So that tells me that leaders of LSCBs were, indecisive and ineffective. Worthless is what the word I'm thinking of right now. I'm going to put that in there anyway. There was no plan in place to tackle CSE. There's absence of strategy. Okay. So there is no coordinated or what's the word I'm looking for? Standardized approach or communication between LSCBs to defend against CSE. They were disregarded, yeah. They've been failed, yeah. I agree. In Tommy's speech, he said he was talking about this in early 2000 ahead of everyone else. It's unclear. There was a woman named Jane Senior who started the inquiry, or one of the inquiries in 1997 in Rotherham specifically. So I think Tommy Robinson has done an awful lot to try and publicise the event, but whether or not he's the first one, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. We will find out. Too many people who should be protecting children are in denial about the realities and don't believe the children. One young person told us they made me feel like it was my fault. Ignored and dismissed the statements of children being raped. They failed to recognise victims. There are many damaging myths. Of the so we've got some statistics here. Of the 323 gangs, noting again our definition of gangs are street-based social groups. So again, more than 2 people, because if it's just 2 people, then it's going to be it's simply a friendship group, as it were. And if some of the stories are to be believed about the fact that about the idea that 10 plus people per night were potentially abusing these children, then we're looking at obviously over 3,200 perpetrators, and we are nowhere near that in terms of prosecutions. Okay, here we go. So of the 323 gangs believed to be currently active in England, identified by police forces, 16 have been associated with CSE. There's been limited problem profiling of the scale and nature of CSE, because only 35% of LSCBs undertook activity. So LSCBs did not perform checks. How do I define this? Help me out here, guys. Failing to recognise victims. Yeah. As to whether CSE was taking place alongside gang activity. I think that's what it's trying to get at. There's pervasive damaging myths about the profiles of both victims and perpetrators that result in many different patterns of sexual exploitation being ignored and the victims not protected. Of the 323 gangs, 16 were associated with CSE. There has been limited problem profiling. Okay. Too many areas are still working in isolation. 1/3 had no plans to have a CSE coordinator. Nearly half have no representative from a sexual health service. Information sharing remains an issue, with agencies holding information on CSE that is not also held by or shared with police. So that says to me that they are hiding some stuff away, or either through deliberate obfuscation or sheer incompetence. Some agencies do engage in collaborative, they're not communicating effectively. LSCBs do not communicate with each other, social services, or the police effectively. It's not the right report, there we go. The delayed response to CSE continues to hamper the development and improvement of practice to tackle it. Only 2 police forces have sought to map and locate and log the connections of girls and young women associated with street gangs, despite recommendations that were made in the interim report. The interim report was 12 months before this one was repeated, so it was released even. So LSCVs did not take on board the recommendations and requirements given in previous reports. And the results are not being monitored, so they're not checking as to whether or not any of their interventions, if they are indeed running any, are working. So, are not assessing performance of their protective, if any, strategies. Alright. Let's see what we have here. Right. I'm just checking to see if anyone sent me anything. We have someone on Twitter's just sent me imams that might interest you in doing an interview with Artawidi or Teezus. They will more likely provide you with a lot of information about what's going on in UK's Muslim community, as something a lot worse than Muslim rape gangs is going on. We'll also have a look at Hope Not Hate, Antifa, Stand Up to Racism. David Wood and Robert Spencer are also people to speak to. We'll see. Thanks for the message. And eSpook6, who is claiming to be Milo Yiannopoulos, is saying groups versus gangs. Yes, this is one of the documents we had earlier. Marvellous. Okay. Where were we? Right. What is working? Let's have a look, see. Gaining a child's confidence. Effective leadership, strategic planning, everyone alert, spotting the warning signs. Again, I'm reading this like, what is working thing? And they're saying, well, the health agencies have circulated the risk indicators and warning signs, and another 17%, bringing it up to 87%, we're going to do so, can improve the likelihood that the victims will be recognised. But we don't see that. We're not seeing that at the moment. Even the interim report, we're not seeing it come from, because they are ignoring the advice that they were given. So they need more oversight, sure. They have a see me, hear me framework. So they want people to actually start listening to the kids. Children's best interest must be the top priority. Participation of children, so children should be involved. Okay. We may end up coming back to this for a what's being done, what should be done thing. But I don't think it's particularly relevant at the moment. It's all entirely, this is all hypothetical. I'm not sure how effective it's been either. Especially given that 19,000 new victims were identified last year. Again, none of this is like police guidance either. This is just the guidance for people looking after the children. The government just chucked money at it in 2010. They're still really concerned about children viewing pornography. There is a very long way to go, however, before we can confidently state that children and young people are being fully protected. You don't say. Alright. So, here we have a bit more information. Okay, so between August 2010... Between August 2010 to October 2011, took them a year basically to get things going. August. Okay. 16,500 children at risk, high risk of CSE, and 2,409 victims that were there. So really, the dataset ranges, because the ones who are at high risk could have been being abused, but they didn't have enough information on them, that's why the high risk comes from. So we're looking at anywhere up to another 19,000 victims in 2010 to 2011. What else did they find? And 28% of perpetrators were under the age of 18. And again, that's another thing which sets this apart, I think, from other stuff, is that it's becoming, when the feminists talk about a rape culture, right? That is a rape culture. They are indoctrinating, brainwashing, and basically bringing in children into the fold. I don't think, in the case of most groups and general paedophiles, that they are having children or bringing children from their community in, making them, not raping them, and instead making them into rapists themselves. I don't think that's what's happening. But that's what's happening with this one. Okay, so let's see. We have... Yes. Perpetrators. Age 12 to 65 with 28% perpetrators being under 18. Which again says a lot, because this is not like some young man phenomenon either. 72% being over the age of, either a bit older. We know that people are struggling to deal with the aftermath of their abuse years afterwards. No shit. I reckon the Jimmy Savile case alerted everyone to CSE in much more of a by the single perpetrators. It caused people to come forward. Right, so they got all of the LSCBs. Covered 39, all 39 police forces, and an additional 237 health services. This could be useful. Right. Data collected from all 39 police forces, all, what was it, 146 CBs, and 237 additional health services. Now, what did they say earlier? Because they said less than a third had appointed a CSE coordinator. Now they have 63%, so it's doubled. But it's still not enough. Right. They're comparing the LSCBs to find out whether or not they are meeting the requirements that LSCBs are required to work on. And they have had, from this report coming out, they've had, obviously, 5 years to do it. 6%. And a third meeting less than half the requirements. Okay? LSCBs failed, so there'll be 94% of LSCBs failed to meet adequate CSE protection requirements in 2014. Over 50% of LSCBs failed to meet half of... Was it over, or was it a third? I want to get that right. One third. Failed to meet 50% of CSE protection requirements, and that is based on the working together guidelines. Right. Let's have a look, see it. Figure 2. Oh, that's on its side now, isn't it? Let's have a look. Good grief. It looks like the average number of requirements they meet is 4 to 5 before they drop off. 4 even. 4. And so the number of them, so 2/3 are failing to meet 8 requirements. 2/3. Or sorry, 2/3 are meeting 8 requirements. Or more. Or fewer. Even. And some of them couldn't manage more than 1. Good grief. So it's not over a third, it's just a third. Yeah. If LSCBs were failing to meet requirements, what action was taken against them? Well, this is what they're covering in this report, so maybe we're going to get to it in a second. There were large, unacceptable variations in local practice around the identification of and response to victims of child sexual exploitation. Too many children and young people are being ignored or falling victim. There have been 5 serious case reviews into CSE. from 2008 onwards, there have been none which involve gangs. So this is the first. Let me see if I put this up top here. This is the first gang-related CSE investigation. Previous inquiries didn't examine gangs. Right. 2008 onward. Again, like this is when we're talking about consequences, because of the nature of these organizations, the apologetics for it basically say things along the lines of, well, you weren't ever trained for this. You didn't exercise the correct leadership in this situation. We will provide you with that kind of leadership and training going forward, as opposed to saying, you fucked up, you're going to prison, children were abused under your care, which does not seem to be happening. Okay. Understanding why so many children and young people are slipping through the net. Oh, someone's worked out how to use Microsoft Word's diagram maker. The inquiry is to identify the 9 major failings, which we've already talked about. Okay. %91% of the health agencies, let's remember that is, where is it? 237. So of the 237, we have 91%. So 215 of them believe they had victims come into contact. Typically every 1 to 6 months. That's a really wide, given that this is the scope of this is only basically a year to 2 years, 18 months really. Only 28%, 18% could provide actual data. I refuse to believe that they were that incompetent. 82%. Of LSCBs failed to produce data. Is it the LSCBs still? Or is it just no, it's the health agencies. So, of health agencies, and again, let's put the actual number there. So it's 237 times 0.82, 194 health agencies failed to collect and produce data on CSE cases in 2009? 12. Don't know where I got the 9. Binary, would you like to come on the stream? Out of curiosity. Just so we can get an idea into the machinations of government, right? Because I think it would be good to have someone else on who can talk about this with some experience. Right. During site visits, children remain largely out of sight. They hide when they are exploited by their peers or by gangs. when they're from minority ethnic groups or are disabled. Right, common phrase, not hitting the threshold for statutory interventions, or subclinical is what psychologists would probably call it. Let's pop that in there. Yeah, just drop in on Discord. I'll jump in a channel. Okay. Anyone talking about the spirit of law is an idiot or thinks you are one? 31% of LSCBs had no specialised CSE services in their area. This is it's unclear to what degree that's necessary, because as much as we know that this is a national problem, we don't know how many areas it does specifically affect, and hopefully we'll find out whether or not it's hidden somewhere or whether or not it's just that far away from enriched areas, shall I say. Mm-hmm. You know, I doubt that the Somerset valleys are rampant with CSE. Of the 69% that did have access to specialist services, some were short-term or time-limited, and they abandoned the children throughout or after the criminal justice process. Good evening, Binary.
Evening. Right channel?
Yeah, we're in the right place. I am just going to send you the document I'm going through. I'm on page 24. It's on stream chat. It's there. It's the Children's Commissioner report.
Well, this should be fun.
Oh, you know. We've gone through all the basic stuff, so having gone through the initial report, which came out 2 years previously, and this is the finalised report. They collected data from all 39 police forces, all 146 LSCBs, and 237 additional health services. And they're looking at the problems which were in the LSCBs, so that's London Safeguarding Children's Boards. In 2012, they were failing to, in the ways in which they measure the prevalence of CSE, so child sexual exploitation, children were proposed as putting themselves at risk rather than the perpetrators being responsible. They ignored the self-disclosed needs of those most at risk. They were indecisive and ineffective. There was no coordinated or standardized approach, and communication was non-existent. They ignored and dismissed the statements of raped children. They did not perform checks as to whether or not CSE was taking place alongside other gang and criminal activity. They didn't communicate with the police or other social services. They didn't take on board the recommendations and requirements that previous reports had given them, to the point where 94% of them were failing to meet those targets, with a third of them meeting less than half of the requirements. And the health organisations and agencies were also failing to collect data, 82% of them, apparently. So that's where we're at the moment.
That's pretty damning, isn't it?
It is pretty damning. This is a report, obviously, from 2012. It's not 2014, but it's looking at data from 2012 and 2011. And basically, it's looking at generalised child sexual exploitation. So it's not specific to the grooming gangs at this point, but they've differentiated between gangs and groups when it comes to the kind of exploitation that's going on, right? So gangs require an identity. Needs to be a larger group than two people. It needs to have territory, an identifying structural feature, and it needs to be in conflict with other groups. Whereas groups are just two or more people of any age with a connection.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable definition on both parts.
Yeah. And we are not quite yet at the stats for what the breakdown is of group versus gang activity, but I don't think this is actually going to produce anything particularly conclusive in that regard either, given that whether or not it's through obfuscation or incompetence, an awful lot of data appears to be missing. So there's that.
My suspicion generally, and this is a general observation about public sector data gathering, is that the public sector is fucking obsessive about gathering data. Mm-hmm. It is very difficult, for example, I can't say in this case, but it'd be very difficult, for example, for the police to not gather the ethnic origin of arrestees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've been collecting ethnic data. Again, this report, we've already noted, has had a problem where they collected data on the ethnicity, but not on the nationality. So they were like, it's unclear. We've identified that you can be a victim of CSE no matter what background, what ethnic background you come from. They refused to put the demographic breakdowns for that in that initial report, and hoping that there might be more in this one. And they also refused to. They basically said that there was no way we could ascertain how many of them are British or foreign in terms of the victims. So yeah, people. I'm just trying to sort your volume out so people can hear you properly.
Am I very quiet?
Oh, you were very loud, and now apparently you're too quiet, so I'll just bump you up to 85%.
Yeah, 85 seems to be where it lives, where it's quite happy, so they might just have to live with it being a bit loud.
Yeah, we'll see. So we're going through those reasons I have just outlined to you about the LSCBs, and they're going into them, and we're trying to mine for a bit more information. So we've already found out that the way in which they deflected things was that they said that even though they knew that the children were being exploited, they were not hitting the threshold for a statutory intervention. So that's pretty damning in itself. We heard from too many professionals that children and young people, even though they were being exploited, were not hitting the threshold for statutory interventions, a complaint that was echoed in call for evidence submissions.
So there must be a definition of what that threshold is somewhere.
Yeah, well, there's not. That's also the thing. They have a lack of standardization between each LSCB, and they're inconsistent on the ways in which they adhere to them. So it's almost impossible to ascertain what a universal standard was for that. But it seemed to be incredibly subjective.
So there's a standard that isn't defined anywhere that we can find, or is at best defined on a local that is inconsistently enforced, and therefore is pretty much arbitrary.
Yeah. So, horrendous already. Now, we're just moving on to page 25, and it says, failing to engage. So, it's clear from the evidence gathered there's a lack of awareness and understanding from some professionals on how to engage with children and young people. 61%, again noting that LSCBs, there are 146 of them. So just keep in mind that you're basically taking whatever percentage. It's about 90 of them. Noted a lack of awareness and understanding from agencies for social care, health, education, and the police engagement. And children and young people slip through the net. Specialist organisations for different groups, like the disabled, LGBT, and young people, highlighted that statutory services had no idea what they were doing. Especially for some young women, I had to speak to a man. I didn't want men to be there. They were often identified as being inaccessible to children. Professionals failed to understand, recognise and accommodate to the individual needs, the language, the beliefs and the feelings of children.
That sentence right there. However, these agencies were placing the onus for engagement on the victim.
Whereabouts is that?
4th paragraph.
I see it, yeah.
That's damning. Can you imagine a scenario where the police were, or say the agencies responsible were turning around to rape victims, adult rape victims, and saying, "Yeah, sorry, you got to come to us. We're not going to do anything about it."
Yeah, we're not going to have any outreach. We're not going to put ourselves out there. We're just going to be a faceless machine, and you can come to us if you like. Especially for very vulnerable people.
How much more vulnerable can you get than young children? Jesus.
Lack of engagement with children and young people was a concern for 23 of LSCPs. Only 23. And notably 18, which is nearly half of all police forces. And again...
I'd be fascinated to see which police forces that is.
Yeah, we'll see. So, of the 18 police forces that stated this was an issue, 61%, again, that's 39 police forces, so... that's 23 of them. 23 police of the 18. Okay. Sometimes it's just not helpful to have statistic in there. So basically, 11 of them stated that children and young people were not engaging with their services. Funny that. Over half were concerned with the lack of disclosure. There was a lack of cooperation. Some victims did not believe they were in any need of support and did not know how to address this issue. Now, I find that kind of a contradiction in terms. Did not believe they were in need of support, also did not know how to address the issue.
I think it's trying to say they didn't know how to address, they didn't believe they were in need of support. I think that's just clumsy language. That's me being charitable. It might be. Might not be. You got to remember with these reports, when they're dozens or hundreds of pages, it is very easy to get some clumsy language trapped in.
It doesn't surprise me, although they did have 4 years to produce the damn thing. Let's see. So, police forces and the LSCPs did not know how to address the barriers.
Yeah, so it is saying that then, basically, yeah. Reiterated it below.
Even where the inquiry observed some exemplary practice, we found they were still struggling to engage with different groups and communities. Right.
Oh, I'm just reading on to lack of leadership under Section 3.
Feel free. I'm just collating. This.
So this is brilliant. All participants called for strong direction from central government. Yeah, they had that, and it was don't investigate this.
Yeah, it is not for you police officers to get involved. I believe it was.
Basically, yes. Community matters.
So, of the 18 police forces that stated that, what was it that was a problem? It was lack of engagement, yeah.
Lack of engagement and no real idea about how to go about generating engagement.
Yeah. Okay. And lack of leadership. Let's see. Call to strong direction. CSE is primarily a child protection issue. There are many patterns. Several equality issues need to be... What the fuck is this? Several equality issues, in addition to race and ethnicity, need to be considered when developing work on sexual exploitation, including gender, sexual orientation, and disability.
And here comes the intersectionality.
It's like, no. You don't need to look at people. You need to look at who are the most at risk. And the reason that they put them at risk is not because of what is referred to in the scientific literature as a setting factor, like basically race, ethnicity, race and gender. But sex is obviously an important one, biological. Ethnicity is obviously an important one because it's cultural. Sexual orientation, potentially, if you've got a lot of gay perpetrators or something like that. But in terms of the victim, it doesn't matter if it's children. It's more the location that matters. And disability is obviously a factor in terms of the willingness of the child to go off with these people and why they trust them and whatnot. But it's not an equality issue. Equality issue is a weird way of doing it.
Well, it tells you something about the person writing this, I would have thought.
In order to prevent CSE, every education institution has to provide sex and relationships education. It's like, congratulations, they think they're their boyfriends, and then they know how to put a condom on. Not that they're using those. Of course, the Minister for Policing and Crime has stated its determination to tackle CSE, right? Whatever, but what are you doing? So, they're funding sexual violence advocates, rape crisis centres, and national teenage relationship abuse campaign. But there's only 13 of them.
To be fair, that doesn't really say whether that's... Oh, no, it does.
And again, this is
a local level scheme, yeah.
It's a local level scheme, but again, it's also it's a commitment. It's a determination. It doesn't tell us what's actually been done, right? Them wanting to fund these things, again, this being 2014, doesn't tell us how much of this came to fruition, how effective it was. So, in that sense, I'm not that bothered about it. If we come to initiatives later on down the line, well, obviously, because this report seems like something I'm going to have to end up referencing again and again. We'll come back to it, but
online training, that's a good laugh. I know what online training means in a public sector context.
Someone who saw the switch over from clerks in the Air Force to what was it called? JPA, Joint Personnel Administration.
Mm.
Yes, that the training that is provided is not any online training that is provided by a government agency is basically worthless. There's no.
Here's a 10-minute PowerPoint on this. Enjoy.
No responsibility, because they can just say, well, we did a feasibility study on it at the beginning. Whether or not people are actually engaging with it is not clear. So, 43% of LSCBs do not have a strategy. Did I put this down? 43% had. Is this no or is it no? None. So 43.
That's not just did not. That's do not as of the writing of this report in the lab.
LSCBs had no CSE strategy as of 2014.
And reading between the lines, the absence of a joint strategy, what that means is where it crosses over between boundaries. Basically, you're going to have one saying, this is a problem, we've identified this going on, what do you want to do about it? The next one that takes it might go, well, that doesn't trigger our particular thresholds. So it's very vulnerable to geographic differences.
I can see this. Right.
Put a note in there about no geographic consistency.
Mm-hmm. No joint or local strategies. In denial, people should have thought of these questions. Many people who should be protecting children and young people are in denial that the problem exists. Voluntary sector agencies reported through the call for evidence that the statutory agencies were resistant and did not consider CSE to be an individual strategic priority for 3 LCSBs. 33 also excluded gang and group violence and were only interested in individuals.
What?
Responses to the dataset show that 3 LCSBs did not consider child CSE to be an individual strategic priority.
Jesus fucking Christ.
33 of those that do exclude... the 33 of those that do consider it to be an individual strategic priority exclude that which is perpetrated by gangs or groups.
So I could almost understand the 3 if they're saying, look, we've not any real history of it in our area, it hasn't happened, all the rest of it, so we don't have any priority for it. 33 deliberate exclusions, that's not fucking excusable.
Yeah. Do consider CSE to be a priority. Excluded abuse perpetrated by street gangs or groups, yeah. That's horrendous, for a start. What else do we have? Site visits uncovered misconceptions about CSE and group and gang contacts. These included ignoring links between a child or young person being abused at home and then subsequently exploited. The denial that street gangs exist, or that if they do, they do not sexually exploit anyone. And forgetting that children and young people are both victims or perpetrators of sexual exploitation. So
read the site visit bit below. That's pretty typical, unfortunately. The minute they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they're considered outside a lot of service
protections. During a site visit, 2 youth workers told the inquiry about a girl with whom they had been working. She was being pressured by her male peers into sexual activity while she was under the influence of alcohol, and the workers said they considered this to be sexual exploitation. They had not been able to refer it to the sexual exploitation team because that team doesn't cover alcohol. That's horrendous.
Which, if you think about it, is completely... I don't know if you've had much experience with mental health services and their sectioning people some years ago, and it's bizarre that they refuse to take on people who are suffering from drug or alcohol use at that time. I'm like, that's like, the vast majority of people with serious mental health issues.
Yeah. Alcohol. The source of and solution to everyone's problems. It's like...
Pretty much. You're like, what? You're stressed out. You're pissed off. You're about to have a breakdown. You go and get drunk. It's pretty common, and worse. I've seen incidences where they've considered them to be drugged up or drunk just because they're on their maintenance medication, lithium or whatever it might be. So that whole system is a different discussion, but fundamentally broken, I think, is a good description.
What else do we have? Worryingly, we also heard of professionals who dismiss what a child is telling them about what they're suffering because it doesn't fit in with a preconceived notion of what constitutes CSE. Allegations that surface from other sources are similarly disregarded. I wish they'd gone into more detail on that, but maybe this is here.
This is a summary report, remember, they're trying to stay out of detail.
I know. I mean, this is as comprehensive as we're going to get in terms of the whole thing.
They wouldn't let it go down to a case level analysis in this kind of thing.
No. Well, this was commissioned by Michael Gove, I think, so or it was certainly a briefing for him. Given the concerns around the lack of identification or focus on CSE within a gang context, a review of LSCB returns for ending gang violence was also undertaken. Okay. They managed it in 32 of 33 areas. Again, that's surprising. So what that's telling us is that we have 146 LSCBs. 33 of them have an EGV strategy. And they managed to get 32 of them. I mean, perhaps that's less egregious. I'm kind of glad that there's not...
Bullet point number 6 in there as well links to that. Only 9 of them have a multi-agency approach, meaning basically their agencies are all doing it singly without joint teams focusing on different aspects.
It's not even just the joint teams within LSCBs. That tells me that they're not even collaborating with the police.
Yes, exactly. They would class police as multi-agency, exactly that.
Mm-hmm. All LSCBs agreed CSE is a priority. You can just imagine it's kind of something like our Yes Minister. They're all sat around the table going, yes, well, of course it's a priority. But 2 excluded gangs-based CSE from this prioritization. As CSE has not
again, to be fair, you don't know whether that's something like the Isle of Man or something where there's about 100 people.
If they haven't identified it, they haven't identified it. Only 11 have a strategy that incorporates CSE in all forms. So 11 out of 146. Only 11 have a strategy that incorporates gang CSE.
Yeah.
So
less than 10%.
Important.
Genius.
Yeah. They did not consider it. Only, how many was it? It was 11, or was it 9? 11, yeah.
11.
So, 11 out of...
Only 9 said they had a multi-agency plan, multi-agency, what is it, MATP, MAP, or MAT?
Only 7.5%, 11 of LSCBs have a strategy encompassing gang and group CSE. And of those, only 9 are collecting prevalence data.
See, that's really damning on that 9. Again, I've just looked at on the LSCB description. Common multi-agency partners include the police, health services, probation services, local youth offending team, courts and family advisory services, and in Wales, the equivalent of that. So they should naturally be working with about 6 multi-agency partners, just as a routine.
Yeah. 7 said they classified gang membership as an indicator of CSE. Okay. So there's that. Just curious, because we don't want to mess up the statistics here. So as much as I say it's 7.5% of LSCBs, this is specific briefing for the ending gang violence thing. So this is out of the 32 that they managed to assess, I think. So it's 34% of those. So 34%, 11 of ending gang violence, EGV, LSCBs. Basically, only a third of them are dealing with CSE in addition to, as part of their ending gang violence strategy. Only 9 are collecting prevalence data. Okay. Failure to recognise, then. Turning a blind eye to CSE stems from misconceptions about the nature of abuse. Only 35% analysed or developed a problem profile of CSE in their local area. Of these, half of them have not included street gangs, and a third have not included groups in that profile. What?
Yep, that's...
So, only 35%. So that's, again, out of the 146, we're back on that main one there. So that's 51 LSCBs have developed a detailed picture of child sexual exploitation in the local area, and then 41% of those, so 51 times 41%, so 20 don't care about street gangs, and 16 even, have not included groups. I'm sensing a running theme here, Binary. I don't know about you.
Funny that, isn't it?
Limited attempts have been made to identify street gangs involved in CSE. Funny that. Although 21 police forces have identified 323 gangs, only 16 are associated with CSE. 12 were being targeted through intelligence gathering ops. Only 2 forces had logged the females who were also linked to gang members, despite the recommendations made by this report in the interim version. During a site visit, a police force demonstrated how they mine their intelligence database to look for CSE. They were shown a list of search terms. Terms included missing, girl, and Asian male. We asked the force what cases they had identified using these search terms. They said all of them involve groups of Asian males.
So that's one of two possibilities. That's incompetence or deliberate failure to tag or metadata information.
Yep. But funnily enough, when your terms included, your search terms on the list include Asian male, and then all of them are Asian male. Funny that.
Which would suggest a deliberate attempt to corrupt the metadata.
During a meeting with two health workers, the inquiry asked about the profile of perpetrators in the local area. We were told they were exclusively Asian males. We asked the workers to talk us through one of their live cases. They said the victim had been exploited in school by her peers, who were all white boys. She was then exploited by an older boyfriend, note the term boyfriend, who was an Asian man in his 20s. Again, seeing as she's still in school, one would suggest that she's, obviously under 18. Following this, she was exploited by an older white man who filmed her having sex with his friends, then exploited by a group of older Asian men who sold her at parties. Finally, a drug addict older white male exploited her, took her to the homes of a much older disabled men, and sold her to pay for his drug habit.
So there's an interesting reverse trend there, isn't there? They've pushed it all onto the Asian elements of that offence, rather than what appears to be pretty evenly balanced in that case between both sets of ethnic groups.
Yeah. So it's an interesting...
So there's some sort of bias at work there, isn't there?
Yeah. We will take this on board anyway, because we're not going to have a bias or anything for this. So the idea is that evidence during phase 1.
It'd be really interesting to know what the ethnicity of the health workers were, because if you look at most of the selection bias stuff, obviously one is massively favouring ones.
Why is someone in my chat? Can we keep things on topic in chat if possible? We know China is lying for sure. Let's keep the coronavirus chat to a minimum. I don't want to miss
unless it's a zombie virus and I get to break out the rifles and the swords. I'm not interested.
Okay. So there's potentially they've been screening only for Asian males. Interesting. Because they've been saying that it's only Asian males. All right.
That was one of the things that I found so surprising about taking Rotherham as an example.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost never a single group that does this kind of thing. It's usually these people the victims are sort of progressed down this wonky staircase of abuse, where they go off one thing, they hit the next thing, they hit the next thing, and it's this chain of events. It's very rare to see anything so organized or so uniform as one subgroup being responsible for it all. That was what I found a bit weird about it. Yeah. I mean, you could see majority, but all? That's strange.
We'll find out. 7. Working in isolation. Okay. And obviously we're not just going to go entirely off this single report. We'll run through to about 6:30, I think. When organizations and sectors work independently, they failed to build a comprehensive picture of the problem in their local area. So it's not even that they're working in isolation when it comes to other LSCBs. They are working in isolation when it comes to all the other local authorities. Close to
yes, they're internally and externally segregated, effectively, in what they're doing.
32% had no plans to appoint a CSE coordinator. Only 6% had CSE in their tackling of gang and youth violence. We've already covered that. Half had no representatives from sexual health services. And only a quarter.
That's pretty bad if you consider the homelessness rates amongst this kind of thing as well.
Only 23% had a multi-agency safeguarding hub, MASH, to identify CSE cases.
In simple terms, that's usually some sort of group that sits there and looks at the aggregate case data and tries to pick out trends to point the people in the right direction.
Yeah. As the age of the victim increases, the likelihood that the services would share information with other safeguarding agencies decreased. 78% said they would share info when a victim was aged 10 to 13. 9% of those said their decision to share would be different if it was 13 to 15. And 19% said it would be different if they were aged 16 to 18. Interesting. So we dropped down from 78% who said they would share when approached around a potential victim down to 50%. 59%. And again, this is only... Why is it only 78% of agencies as well? Like, there's a 22% in there who are like, if a 10-year-old comes to us and says they're being raped, we're not going to share it with anyone.
Well, to be fair, it doesn't... That is one interpretation of it, but again, and I think it says this later on, a couple of paragraphs, the IT systems that will actually allow this data sharing on anything other than individual level, they're not the same between a lot of...
they can't... Yeah,
certainly police forces anyway. I couldn't tell you about LSCBs, but I would imagine it's the same problem.
There's no centralisation, and if they do attempt to centralise it, it becomes so wonky and none of it works either. You just have to look at when they try to centralise the NHS databases.
Yeah, I went for a conversation with a firm recently, part of the NHS, and they tried to unify what they were doing across, 6 different regional areas, and they blew best part of 35 million quid on it. It failed.
All right, let's get through the 8 and 9 here. The inquiry's interim report urged agencies to be proactive in finding the victims of CSE rather than waiting for young people to tell someone they're being abused. Funny that! Oh, it's almost like that's common sense. All directors of children's services, the CMO, directors of public health and chief constables, royal colleges, blah, 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 should circulate the warning signs of CSE to all professionals who come into contact with children and young people.
Only 2 police forces have comprehensively mapped. Check out.
Yeah. Every area was urged to map and log the connections of girls associated with gangs. 2 police forces out of the, 39?
39 or 40 now, depending on what it's come to now.
2 out of 39 comprehensively mapped the young women associated with street gangs and children. 8 have done partial mapping. So even then, even on the top end, so we've got something like less than 5%, right? So, yeah, 5% have managed to actually comprehensively map these things. Out of that, then 25% have completed at least partial mapping. 8 were able to evidence their use of behaviour orders to stop cases of CSE. Delays are further aggregated by bureaucratic and time-consuming processes. One local authority observed that the key for a successful intervention is designated oversight, because it becomes an addition on top of other work commitments. They highlighted there was an increase in demand for feedback and consultation, so this is time-consuming. The absence of standardised reporting tools, recording data, as often information is requested in a number of ways which should ameliorate this process. Okay.
In simple terms, the data ain't recorded the same way, and it's requested in different ways, meaning it's hard to share and compare at best.
So, 5% I just want to get this stuff down. 5% of police forces comprehensively mapped social connections and location data of girls at risk or connected to gang activity. 25% had undertaken at least partial mapping, and difficulties, or rather like a lack of standardization, I guess, of data collection and oversight for that collection. Just reduced the amount collected, as it was seen to be an extra task on top of regular work. Because again, most of these places do not have a specific task force to deal with this. Results not monitored then. The inquiry called for evidence collected 121 values of CSE interventions, which is damning in and of itself. No, not necessarily, actually. There were 85 organisations, 92% of which were led by volunteers. The statutory agencies failed to check whether or not these actions worked. There was also no common agreement among agencies as to what they were trying to achieve. There's no common agreement as to what they're trying to achieve. Good grief. And again, this is only 85 organisations out of the 237. Here we are. So here's the damning paragraph. Between January 2009 and December 2012, only 12% of LSCBs received notification of potentially serious case reviews. So these are LSCBs being informed by the organisations who are giving the CSE interventions, right?
And furthermore, only 35% of those acted upon the cases involving groups.
Only 35% acted upon the cases involving groups, and none of them touched gangs. None of them. Not a single board elected to take forward a case that involved gangs. Fucking hell. So that's really important. Because that just tells you they didn't want to touch it with a barge pole. You can't tell me that there just wasn't enough evidence. Yes. They're going, not touching that.
Yes, I cannot see a way where there would not have been discussions of who wants to lick the dynamite type thing.
Let me try and I'm going to pull in some more stuff from this so when I come back to this, it's not all.
See, if you could find what a normal serious case review uptake would be, that would be interesting. What sort of ratio they would normally take it forward on.
Mm.
So, no, the sake of argument, if the normal ratio is 40% and they achieved 0, that should tell you everything right there.
Yeah. 84% of LSCB said that agencies use detailed risk assessments when victims were identified, although we already know that they refused to identify victims in a number of cases. And the quality of these varied considerably. There was a standard common assessment framework, others used local CSE assessments, and the remaining third used any others. All the different areas measured risk differently, and their success rates differently. So few have evaluated their effectiveness. 71% of LSCBs are unaware of any support mechanisms in place to protect the welfare of professionals working with the victims and perpetrators. In some cases, children and young people who are both.
Just looks like the whole system is completely disjointed, doesn't it?
Disjointed, uninterested. As I say, it's going to be pretty damning when I get to the McPherson report side of things, which I reckon is one of the big things which kicked off the idea of just going, I'm not touching that.
Yeah, well, why would you put yourself in a place where you can be accused of both individual and institutional racism without that's pretty much what most forces drew as a conclusion from that.
The only bit I can see, which has racial ethnic context, which I feel was unwarranted, is the search terms that they used, which were primarily Asian male, even though there were others involved.
It's hard to say whether that was unwarranted, though, without knowing what the makeup of that area is. For example, if you were doing that in South Birmingham, that's pretty reasonable because it's about 60% Asian. So if you were doing that in the Highlands in Scotland, that would be a bit weird.
Yeah, but also there's elements of we were only given the one case study example, so we don't know to what degree. We basically don't know to what degree that example is generalizable either.
But it would seem to play into a wider pattern in public services, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You can't say definitively, but you can say, yeah, this isn't exactly inconsistent with the wider pattern.
Okay, I'm not going to look into now the things which they claim that they're doing to cover it all, because I'm interested in the scope of the abuse rather than the what they're doing to correct it now. I want to know what the historical picture is, and we'll come back to this stuff.
I don't think the things that they're doing now will be
neither do I.
Visible as successful or not for another couple of years.
I have no
Same
doubt.
as if you'd looked at this at the time, I don't think you would have known whether this was going to be successful or not 4 years ago.
No. See me, hear me side of things, and right. So let's do a summarize. What do we have here? This is what I'm looking at. I'm on page 100 and appendix 2. Patterns of group and gang associated child sexual exploitation. You always got to check the appendices as well because they hide things there. What is appendix 1? How evidence was gathered. Right, what did they do? They did a call for evidence, an open call, and they had 96 submissions across 180 agencies. They had data requests, police force data set requests, clinic data requests, site visits, 2 pieces of commissioned research, 3 pieces of commissioned research, and the research covered about 650 people. But of those, only 53 young people.
I suspect that's a level of data that's not going to be too helpful, though, in those tables.
Inconsistencies in submissions. Some submissions only filled out multiple choice questions, others submitted prose or did both. Some did not follow the preset questions at all. Not everyone fully completed the forms. A single LSCB dataset response was received from Westminster, Hammersmith, Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea, as they have arrangements in place across all their local authorities. But it was acknowledged that not all the activity outlined was consistently in place across them all. But this was not broken down and could only be counted as a single submission. That tells me that something needs to be looked into with greater depth there.
Well, again, it could go either way. It could charitably be that they've got their shit in order very well. Or it could be that they're trying to conceal something by aggregating the data.
It's not even if they're trying to conceal something. If the data cannot be broken down beyond three boroughs, then something needs to be going on there, which to make it clear. You have a foggier picture. The more macro it gets. Which is again why we're trying to do the comprehensive thing here, and why it's taken us nearly 3 hours to go through a single document, in effect, which is just the nature of this kind of research.
Uh, 38 forces apparently in the evidence, not 39. They've excluded City of London Police since it's such a small force.
Okay, good to know.
Don't know if that makes much of a difference to the percentages, but
I doubt it. Even so, it's still tiny.
So this inquiry pretty much wrapped up in September 2013, meaning
Yes.
it's 6 years out of date.
So we went through three versions of this inquiry, right? So there's the briefing saying it's going to take place to Michael Gove. There was the initial inquiry, which is the kind of like the rushed one that they do, which is kind of a report on how they're getting on with it. And then this one, which is the main one, the final report, as it were. Okay. So, patterns of Grouping Gang associated CSE. Compared with single perpetrator sexual violence, group-based sexual offending is committed more frequently by offenders in their teens and early 20s, as opposed to single offenders. It involves leaders and followers based on seniority, with older perpetrators ordering younger ones to offend or on some group members, instigating abuse in which the rest of the group then take part. Go find us some girls, that sort of thing. Involves greater levels of physical violence. The initial inquiry recognised that street gangs are one type of group. There are differences between gang-associated CSE and other forms of group-associated abuse. So, group-associated sexual exploitation is usually in exchange for accommodation, money or gifts, targeted residential children's homes, had a party model of commercial exploitation. It's quite strongly linked to intrafamilial child sexual abuse and transport hubs. Gang-associated sexual exploitation was a weapon used in gang conflict. It used it to set up their rivals. It was used as a form of punishment on their members and used as a form of initiation. It's quite often peer-on-peer exploitation. It was linked to sexual bullying within schools, drugs and alcohol, and trafficking.
I think we know which one of those categories it fits predominantly, don't we?
In the middle one, yes. And they have overlaps. So, group-associated child exploitation involves a network of individuals who, for a range of reasons, come together to sexually exploit children. They may never meet. They are likely to be connected through the victims, taxi firms or bus shelters they use, the takeaway shops they frequent in order to find these children or young people, or parties where they go to pay to abuse children and young people. It might also be peer groups, families, neighbourhoods, or other connections. In all cases, they are identified as a group in the context of CSE, but might not be identified as a group for any other reason. So, case studies: a man groomed a child, brought the child to the homes of his friends, or invited his friends to his own property for the purposes of CSE. The friends would not meet or even know each other. Instead, the child would be taken from house to house. It's often unclear as to whether these cases involve financial profit. In some instances, victims say they witnessed financial exchanges, but these were often small and ad hoc. Bus and coach stations were being used by perpetrators to spot and recruit children and young people for sexual exploitation. They would take people who they knew were running away from home and living on the street. They would know that these people needed a room. They were picked up at the stations, offered accommodation in exchange for sex. In a number of cases, the same child or young person would return to the bus station, and different men would make the same offer. In cases like these, individuals were connected through the victim and their use of bus shelters rather than a network used to find vulnerable children and young people. Bus or taxi drivers often offered lifts in exchange for sex to the homeless or standing at bus shelters.
And it seems bizarre to me that they've not...
Well, we're just on groups at the moment. We're not moving to gangs yet. Although again, it seems to blur the line. The inquiry heard of individuals who would find and groom children using social networking, meet them in person, circulate them amongst their group of friends, who would then exploit them. A sole perpetrator would home in on a group of girls from the same school, groom them online, meet them in person, use the girls to recruit their peers. They then passed these children and young people around his wider friendship group, and was identified to be around the country. 19 cases were identified as both group and gang associated, and in the cases of 632 victims, agencies, which is about a third for the purposes of this report, agencies would not confirm whether or not it was a street gang or another form of group. So they don't know. They're not collecting data on that would identify the group specifically.
I wonder why.
Whether or not it's a familial case. In these cases, the relative or friend would abuse the victim themselves, pass them around a friendship network, potentially for a financial profit, but not always. Sometimes associated with domestic or honour-based violence. Adults organising basically pimps who were prostituting adult women were also sexually exploiting children connected to those women. Adult women would be coerced to recruit 16 and 17-year-olds living in the same accommodation. Right.
That's remarkably sneaky.
A group of men in their 20s responsible for grooming girls, mostly 12 to 15, living in residential children's homes and were vulnerable. They were taken to private properties and hotels. Men of different ages visited them and paid to rape them. Girls could then be locked in these properties for days and are given alcohol or drugs to subdue them. They were expected to take part in several sexual practices, including some that caused them physical injury or are particularly humiliating. We know what those are without mentioning them. Some girls were also trafficked and sold to men in other parts of the country. The exploitation is linked to businesses and private accommodation, so they own the buildings that they're using. There is an organisational structure and hierarchy to the crime group who make a profit from this exploitation. Example 2. Boys aged 14 to 15 are groomed by men in their early 20s to recruit and abuse girls in their school. They buy the boys trainers and phones and collect the boys from school. Sometimes young women with a history of sexual exploitation would also be used to recruit. Victims would be abused by the men in their early 20s and then passed around through a party model. Children and young people, generally girls, although occasionally boys, would also be given alcohol or drugs, trafficked to private homes or warehouses, and adult men would attend and pay organisers to rape them. The men who pay to abuse them are rarely identified. There's no information to confirm whether or not it's the same men at different parties or different groups of men on each occasion. Although one can imagine that they probably come back for seconds. I imagine. Ah, God. Yes, this is brutal.
It's not easy reading, is it? Let's put it that way.
29% of peer-on-peer exploitation were under the age of 19. The youngest was 12. The inquiry received evidence of numerous cases of CSE within schools, sexual bullying. Several groups sexually assaulted and harassed the victim routinely over an extended period, sometimes because the victim had been involved in a relationship or had been videoed or photographed in a sexual act and this had been circulated. Others would then demand the sexual activity or assault the victim. In one case, the inquiry learned of girl A who recruited boy B to sexually assault another female pupil. The victim was told she had to take part in sex with boy B in order to get back a possession that girl A stole. In all of these cases, there was little or no evidence of a connection to organised or commercial exploitation. And then there's neighbourhood-based CSE. Peer groups were routinely involved in sexually assaulting girls who lived near them, often in public places. In some cases, boys would use text messages or the internet to invite their friends to join in. On other occasions, it would also be in parks with alcohol. So now we move on to gangs. Let's see. Has several characteristics of its own. It's used as a weapon. Young girls will also offer sex, particularly to a gang leader, to achieve status and protection from other sexual violence by other gang members, potentially as an initiation act. It may also be used to set up rival members or associates to be attacked. Interesting. Of the 2,409 victims identified in Phase 1, again this is over a single 18-month period, 433 of them were gang-associated child sexual exploitation. It was used as a means of threatening or punishing a member of a rival gang. It was an opportunistic thing, through friendships or relationships. It was used to punish men. It was used to punish women who were trying to leave or end relationships. They would be ordered to have sex with a rival gang member to gain their trust and gather information. This information would then be passed on. If they were uncovered as plants, they would be subject to physical and sexual violence by those they had set up. Sometimes young women were wrongly suspected of being set up and assaulted. Boys and young men might also be required to rape rivals or take part in group-based sexual activity with a young woman as part of a line-up as a means of demonstrating solidarity with the gang. Again, not a lot there which is very specific to the grooming gangs as far as I'm aware. But it's a much more, I don't know if it's much more of a community ethos there with them. It's hard to tell. I imagine more will come about when we have more case studies, which is, again, more difficult reading, but we need to go through it. Sorry to everyone who's listening to this and finding it distressing, but unfortunately it comes with it. Warning signs and vulnerabilities. Okay. Right. I think we'll stop there with the appendices. If I just go
there's a bit of a rabbit hole here, isn't there?
Yeah, this may be going on for next time, but I want to summarise what we've learned today, pretty much. So, as far as I can tell, we've worked out that this is a big inquiry that took place in 2010 to 2011, over 14 months. The victims were between the ages of 10 to 19, although there were 18 cases where the victims were between the ages of 4 and 9. And this were coming from 1,831 victims, and that's just the data from 9 organisations who actually had victim data. The perpetrators were both male and female, although predominantly male, and 28% of them were under 18. And this came about because of the 9 men who were convicted in Rochdale. And they concluded that group and gang associated child CSE was taking place across England, and they proposed an interim report which came forward, which we've just been through, the final report rather. We didn't go through the interim because it didn't have anything additional in it. We've defined gangs and groups as the government is defining them. We've ascertained a huge number of issues which are taking place within the London Safeguarding Children's Board, or LSCBs, including the fact that they ignored groups, they failed to address the needs of the people who were coming to them, they were indecisive and ineffective, they had no standardised or effective approach, they didn't talk to one another, they ignored and dismissed the statements of children who were being raped, they didn't check whether or not CSE was associated with the gangs that the kids were also potentially involved with, they didn't communicate with social services or the police, They didn't take on board the recommendations and requirements which were then given to them after they were previously found to have all these problems, and they are not, as of the date of this particular inquiry, assessing the performance of any of their protective strategies, to the point where 94% of them are not meeting their targets or their requirements in terms of their CSE protection targets. There we go. Of this, we've got more data on the ways in which they're failing, as well as some of the police site visits and how they're categorizing data. There we go.
Can you imagine any other public sector service that would be allowed to fail at a rate of 94%?
All of them, isn't it?
But just take an example. Can you imagine, like specifically, can you imagine what happened if a hospital failed 94% of its waiting target or 94% of its surgery survival targets?
I mean, it's something like surgery survival, then yeah, I can understand. But I feel waiting targets probably is failing an awful lot of those, and like the number of beds that they have access to. Like the NHS is a great big beast, but I would say things like if like even the armed forces, right? And the armed forces is definitely under attack from the MOD, right? And they're shrinking it down and paring it out and have poorly written contracts all over the place. Of that, there are 102 at-risk trades across the entire armed forces, and they're failing to meet their targets on average by about 18%, and that's considered to be a really serious crisis in the armed forces, which is why they're currently desperate for retention and efficiency upscaling strategies. But the idea of 94% is insane. It's insane. I agree. Yes, and this is a data set which we've ascertained where their data set comes from. And of the police forces, we've worked out that roughly half of them have an issue with lack of engagement because they've got no strategy. 2/3 of those stated that children were not engaging with their services. Over half were concerned with the lack of disclosure, over half were concerned with the lack of cooperation, and half were concerned because victims did not believe they were in need of support, which kind of flies in the face of their idea that they're frustrated that people aren't engaging with their services when they know that half of the victims don't know that they are suffering unnecessarily or that they're being abused. And still, we know that of the LSCBs, nearly half have no child sex exploitation strategy as of the end of this, and there is no joint or local standardised strategy at all.
Although, to be fair, as of 6 years ago, we don't know. That's since been fixed.
Indeed. And it may be, like the number of victims that have been identified in the last year, the 19,000 from 2018 even, that is potentially a sign that they're finally there's a greater transparency and people are getting to grips with it more, and so the extent of the problem is being revealed. But we don't know. And from a historical perspective, this gives us a really good idea of how things were progressing about a decade ago, and we want to go further back next time.
For all we know, that 19,000 could be the cost of continued lack of action, but it could be that's probably the more worrying thought for me, is if that's the reduced amount.
So I'm going to put this link in the description of the video, which has the findings in it if people are interested in going through that again. Again, it has links to the original documents. If you find interesting things, or you think we've missed anything in here, please do let us know if you think there's something that's going to be relevant for this. I can see that we've had another £5 super chat coming from Bakuta Pterodax. Thank you very much. Wasn't expecting any support from revenue-wise from this kind of stream, but he says, with all this black pilling, here are 2 white pills. The UK will not implement Article 13, and the economy is projected to grow faster than the EU's. Yes, I think that's a really good thing to lean into, especially as we approach the Brexit date. When it comes to this project in particular, I hope that we'll come back. We'll do many more research streams to get an idea of what we want to do with it, and we'll get, because at this early stage it's all very, vague and we don't necessarily know everything, but we should have more and more and more to reflect on and research back on. And I will try and, in my off time, to put together some semblance of form to how this will be presented, because obviously if it's just a load of data, in the same way that we have all the data, if it's not comprehensively and properly presented, it doesn't work. But there
It'd be
we
good
go.
to get some brief. If you can boil this down to a 5-minute version, I suspect you might get some other YouTubers to share it around as well, even outside of our immediate circle.
Well, that's the hope. As I say, I'm planning on turning it into just put that there. Turning it into a mini documentary up to an hour long when we get to the end of it. But we obviously need to go through all that stuff, and I want checks and balances on my own research. So I'll be doing the vast majority of, if not all of the research on stream, if I can, so that I'm protected against things like accusations of racism, Islamophobia, and all that nonsense that just shouldn't be in there. Right. Comments are being automatically deleted. I'm not sure.
Some of them will be if you type a certain keyword, they'll get auto-nuked. I found that.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I will be going through another one probably tomorrow. We'll probably do another 3-4 hours tomorrow. We'll see how we go. But yeah, hopefully, not that you've enjoyed this, but you found this interesting, and you have some more information to go off now, and we can come back and put something more comprehensive together tomorrow. All right, take care, everybody. Good night.